The V-Weapons Terror. On June 13, 1944, exactly 1 week after D-Day, Londoners heard an unusual sound in the night sky, a buzzing engine that suddenly cut out, followed by silence, then a devastating explosion. The V-1 flying bomb had arrived. The Vergeltungswaffe-1, or Vengeance Weapon 1, was the world's first operational cruise missile. Developed at Peenemünde on Germany's Baltic coast, the V-1 was a pilotless aircraft powered by a pulse jet engine. At 25 feet long with a 17-foot wingspan, it carried a 1,870-pound warhead at speeds approaching 400 miles per hour. The weapon's simplicity was its genius. Unlike traditional aircraft, the V-1 required no pilot and cost roughly 1/50th the price of a bomber. Its guidance system used a gyroscopic autopilot and a simple odometer mechanism that counted down distance traveled. When the preset distance was reached, the engine cut out and the bomb plunged to Earth. Between June 1944 and March 1945, Germany launched approximately 10,000 V-1s at Britain, with about 2,400 reaching London. The attacks killed over 6,000 civilians and injured 18,000 more. The psychological impact was profound. Unlike conventional bombing raids that could be anticipated, the V-1s arrived unpredictably, day and night, their distinctive buzzing earning them the nickname doodlebugs, or buzz bombs. The British response was comprehensive. Fighter pilots learned to tip the V-1's wings with their own, disrupting the gyroscope and sending it off course. Anti-aircraft batteries formed defensive lines. Barrage balloons created aerial obstacles. Yet the V-1 campaign demonstrated a terrifying new reality. War could now be waged without risking a single soldier's life. If the V-1 was frightening, its successor was apocalyptic. On September 8, 1944, Parisians heard a mysterious double boom echo across the city. 16 seconds later, London experienced the same phenomenon, followed by an explosion in Chiswick that killed 3 people. No air raid sirens had sounded. No aircraft had been spotted. The V-2 rocket had announced its arrival. The Vergeltungswaffe-2 was humanity's first long-range ballistic missile and the first man-made object to reach space. Standing 46 feet tall and weighing 27,000 pounds at launch, it represented a quantum leap in military technology. Powered by liquid oxygen and alcohol, the V-2 reached altitudes of 55 miles and speeds exceeding 3,500 miles per hour, faster than sound, faster than any defense. The rocket's chief architect was Wernher von Braun, a brilliant 32-year-old engineer who had dreamed of space travel since childhood. Under his leadership at Peenemünde, a team of scientists and engineers created what was essentially a space program in the guise of a weapons project. The technical challenges were immense. Designing turbo pumps that could feed 290 pounds of fuel per second, creating guidance systems that could function at hypersonic speeds, solving combustion instability that destroyed early prototypes. From September 1944 to March 1945, Germany launched approximately 3,000 V-2 rockets, primarily at London, Antwerp, and other Allied targets. Unlike the V-1, the V-2 gave no warning. Traveling faster than sound, it struck before its sonic boom could be heard. The explosion came first, then the roar of its descent, a reversal of normal experience that added to the weapon's psychological terror. The V-2 killed approximately 7,000 people, but its true cost was far higher. An estimated 20,000 concentration camp prisoners died producing the missiles in the underground Mittelbau-Dora factory, where slave laborers worked in horrific conditions. More people died making the V-2 than were killed by it, a grotesque calculus that underscored the Nazi regime's moral bankruptcy. Yet the weapon's strategic impact was limited. Each V-2 cost as much as a bomber and carried less payload with far less accuracy. The resources devoted to the program, had they been used for conventional weapons or fighter aircraft, might have prolonged the war significantly. Instead, Hitler's obsession with wonder weapons diverted critical resources for more practical military needs. The jet age arrives. On July 18, 1942, a strange aircraft took off from Peenemünde's airfield. It had no propeller, yet it accelerated faster than any fighter the world had seen. The Messerschmitt Me 262 had just completed its first fully jet-powered flight, ushering in a new era of aviation. The Me-262 was the world's first operational jet fighter. Powered by two Junkers Jumo 004 turbojet engines, it could reach speeds of 540 miles per hour, 100 miles per hour faster than the best Allied fighters. Its swept-wing design, necessary for high-speed stability, would influence jet aircraft design for generations. Armed with four 30mm cannons and capable of carrying rockets or bombs, the Me-262 was devastatingly effective in combat. Allied pilots who encountered it described a feeling of helplessness. Their conventional fighters simply couldn't catch it. One Me-262 pilot, Franz Stigler, recalled, "It was like a modern sports car racing against Model T Fords." Yet despite its revolutionary capabilities, the Me-262 arrived too late and in too few numbers. Hitler's initial insistence that it be developed as a bomber rather than a fighter delayed its deployment. Engine reliability problems plagued early models. The turbojet engines had a service life of just 25 hours before requiring replacement. Fuel shortages limited operations. Allied bombing had destroyed much of Germany's manufacturing capacity. Approximately 1,400 Me-262s were built, but fewer than 300 saw combat. In the hands of experienced pilots, they were lethal. Major Walter Nowotny shot down 258 enemy aircraft during the war, many in his Me-262. But experienced pilots were scarce by 1945, and the jets were increasingly flown by hastily trained novices. Had the Me-262 entered service 2 years earlier in significant numbers, the air war over Europe might have taken a dramatically different course. Allied bomber formations, which suffered heavy losses even against conventional fighters, would have faced a nearly insurmountable threat. The delay in developing the jet fighter as a fighter, rather than as a bomber, may have been one of Hitler's most consequential strategic errors. Even more radical than the Me-262 was the Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet, a rocket-powered interceptor that remains the fastest piston or rocket-powered manned aircraft ever to see operational service. The Me-163 was essentially a manned missile. Powered by a Walter HWK 109-509 rocket motor burning a volatile mix of concentrated hydrogen peroxide and hydrazine hydrate, it could reach altitudes of 40,000 feet in under 3 minutes and achieve speeds of 600 miles per hour. Its rate of climb was extraordinary, 30,000 feet per minute, far exceeding any conventional aircraft. The design was revolutionary, a swept-wing, tailless aircraft with a small, armored cockpit. It carried no landing gear, taking off from a wheeled dolly that detached after launch, landing on a retractable skid. The pilot sat in a semi-reclining position to better withstand high G-forces. In combat, the Me-163's tactics were unique. It would climb rapidly to altitude, make a single high-speed pass at enemy bombers, then glide back to base with its engines shut down. The entire powered flight lasted less than 8 minutes. After that, the Comet was a glider. But the aircraft was extraordinarily dangerous to fly. The fuel mixture was hypergolic. It ignited spontaneously on contact. Any leakage could dissolve both the aircraft and its pilot. Several pilots were killed or horribly injured when fuel sloshed during landing, eating through the fuselage. The high landing speed made every approach hazardous. Of the approximately 370 Me-163s built, more pilots may have died in accidents than in combat. The operational record reflects these challenges. Though Me-163s made approximately 60 combat sorties, they destroyed fewer than 20 Allied aircraft. The rocket fighter was a technological marvel, but a strategic failure. Too dangerous, too limited in range and endurance, too difficult to operate under combat conditions. The submarine revolution. In the Atlantic Ocean, a different kind of technological race was unfolding, one that threatened Britain's very survival. By 1943, Allied anti-submarine warfare had gained the upper hand. Improved radar, increased air patrols, and code-breaking had made the Atlantic increasingly deadly for German U-boats. The submarine force that had nearly starved Britain into submission was suffering unsustainable losses. Germany needed a revolutionary answer. That answer was the Type XXI U-boat. Designated the Elektroboot, the Type XXI represented a fundamental rethinking of submarine design. Previous submarines were essentially surface ships that could temporarily submerge. The Type XXI was designed to operate primarily underwater. Its streamlined hull, far cleaner than conventional U-boats, allowed submerged speeds of 17 knots, faster than most surface ships and fast enough to outrun many escort vessels. The Type XXI carried a massive battery array, triple that of earlier U-boats, enabling it to remain submerged for days. A snorkel device allowed diesel engines to run while just below the surface, recharging batteries without fully surfacing. Hydraulic systems allowed rapid diving, less than 20 seconds to reach periscope depth. Advanced sound damping made it quieter than any previous submarine. Its weapons were equally impressive. 6-bow torpedo tubes could fire a full salvo within 20 minutes. Previous boats required hours to reload. The torpedoes themselves were acoustic homing weapons that could track targets independently. The submarine's sonar was far more sophisticated than earlier models. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the German Navy, believed that 300 Type XXI U-boats could have turned the tide of the Atlantic War. He was likely correct. Allied anti-submarine tactics relied on detecting surfaced U-boats. A submarine that rarely surfaced, that could outrun pursuit underwater, that could strike quickly and disappear. Such a weapon would have been extremely difficult to counter with 1945 technology. But the Type XXI came too late. The first boat became operational only in April 1945, weeks before Germany's surrender. Of 118 boats launched, only 2 conducted war patrols, neither engaging enemy forces. Yet the design was so advanced that it influenced submarine development worldwide for decades. Soviet, American, and British post-war submarines all incorporated Type XXI features. Even more radical was a parallel development, the Type 17, also known as the Walter boat, named for its designer Helmuth Walter. This experimental submarine used hydrogen peroxide as an oxidizer for its turbine, allowing true underwater propulsion without access to atmospheric oxygen. In trials, it achieved submerged speeds approaching 25 knots, performance that wouldn't be matched until nuclear submarines appeared a decade later. Only 4 were built, and none saw combat. The technology was complex and dangerous. Hydrogen peroxide was highly volatile. But it demonstrated that true underwater performance, independent of the surface, was achievable. The concept would eventually evolve into nuclear propulsion. The superweapons that never were. Among the more fantastical Nazi weapon concepts was the sun gun, a proposed orbital mirror that would focus solar radiation to incinerate cities. Conceived by rocket scientist Hermann Oberth, the idea involved placing a 100-meter mirror in orbit 5,100 miles above Earth. The mirror would concentrate sunlight into a focused beam capable of boiling oceans or setting cities ablaze. Scientists worked on the project at the German Army Artillery Proving Grounds, calculating trajectories and mirror designs. The concept was theoretically possible but practically absurd given the technology of the 1940s. Even reaching orbit was beyond German capabilities, let alone constructing and positioning such a massive structure. Yet resources were devoted to studying it, another example of Nazi Germany's tendency to pursue grandiose projects while neglecting fundamental military needs. More practical, though still unrealized, was the America Bomber Program, an effort to develop aircraft capable of striking the United States. Several designs were proposed. The Messerschmitt Me 264 was a long-range bomber designed to reach New York from Europe. The Horton Ho 18 was a flying-wing design intended for intercontinental range. The Junkers Ju 390 prototype actually flew, and possibly came within miles of the American coast on a reconnaissance mission, though this remains disputed. None entered production. The technical challenges were immense, and by the time these aircraft might have been ready, Germany lacked the fuel, pilots, and industrial capacity to produce them in meaningful numbers. Yet the program demonstrated German engineers' ambition and capability. Had the war started differently, such weapons might have been available years earlier. More successful were guided anti-ship weapons, precision munitions that foreshadowed modern cruise missiles. The Fritz X was a 3,000-pound armor-piercing bomb fitted with a radio control system. A bombardier in the launching aircraft could guide it to target using a joystick. On September 9, 1943, a Fritz X struck the Italian battleship Roma, detonating its magazine and sinking the ship with the loss of 1,393 lives, including the fleet commander. It was the first sinking of a warship by a precision-guided weapon. The HS-293 was a rocket-boosted glide bomb, also radio-controlled. It sank or damaged numerous Allied ships, including the British sloop HMS Egret and several merchant vessels. These weapons were genuinely revolutionary. They demonstrated that precision strikes were possible from beyond anti-aircraft range. Modern anti-ship missiles are direct descendants of these World War II designs. The shadow of what might have been. The most consequential, what if, of World War II concerns atomic weapons. Germany had world-leading physicists, had discovered nuclear fission, and had access to Norwegian heavy water facilities. Could Nazi Germany have developed nuclear weapons? The German nuclear program, led by Werner Heisenberg, made significant progress in nuclear physics but never came close to producing a bomb. The reasons are complex and debated. Some argue that Heisenberg deliberately slowed progress, unwilling to give Hitler such a weapon. Others point to strategic decisions. Germany focused on weapons that could win the war quickly, and nuclear development was seen as too long-term. Allied bombing destroyed heavy water facilities. Key scientists were Jewish refugees who fled to Allied nations. The reality appears to be that Germany never committed the massive resources required. The Manhattan Project employed 130,000 people and cost $2 billion, nearly $30 billion in current dollars. Germany never devoted resources on this scale to nuclear weapons. By contrast, they spent enormous sums on V-weapons and jet aircraft that offered more immediate tactical benefits. Had Germany focused on nuclear weapons from 1939, had they retained their Jewish scientists, had they prioritized the program above other advanced weapons, the outcome might have been catastrophically different. A nuclear-armed Nazi Germany remains one of history's most chilling alternate scenarios. The paradox of Nazi superweapons is this. Germany produced genuinely revolutionary technology yet still lost the war. Why did these wonder weapons, Wunderwaffen, fail to change the outcome? First, timing. Most advanced weapons arrived too late. The Me-262 could have been decisive in 1942. By 1945, Allied air superiority was overwhelming. The Type XXI U-boat might have starved Britain in 1943. In 1945, the war was already lost. Second, resources. Germany's economy, already stretched, couldn't support multiple advanced weapon programs simultaneously. Each wonder weapon diverted resources from conventional arms. 1,000 conventional fighters might have been more valuable than 100 jet fighters. Improved tank production might have been more useful than V-2 rockets. Third, strategic confusion. Hitler repeatedly interfered with weapons development, insisting the Me-262 be a bomber, demanding V-weapons for retaliation rather than military targets. Military leadership was fragmented, with different services pursuing competing programs. Fourth, fundamental limitations. By 1944, Germany faced insurmountable disadvantages in manpower, industrial capacity, and resources. No weapon, however advanced, could overcome Allied numerical superiority and strategic position. The Reich was fighting a three-front war against enemies with combined populations and industrial output many times greater than their own. Finally, the moral dimension cannot be ignored. Germany's weapons programs relied heavily on slave labor. Thousands died producing V-2 rockets in underground factories. The Nazi regime's brutality created resistance movements, ensured neutral countries opposed them, and motivated Allied forces with righteous anger. Advanced weapons cannot compensate for moral bankruptcy. Legacy of the secret weapons. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Allied forces discovered a technological treasure trove. American, British, and Soviet teams competed to capture German scientists, documents, and equipment. Operation Paperclip brought Wernher von Braun and hundreds of German rocket scientists to America. They would design the Saturn V that carried Americans to the moon. The V-2 became the foundation of both American and Soviet ballistic missile programs. The Me-262's design influenced the first generation of jet fighters worldwide. Swept wings, axial flow jet engines, and high-speed aerodynamics, all pioneered by German engineers, became standard in military aviation. The Type XXI U-boat design was copied directly by Allied navies. American and Soviet submarines built in the late 1940s were essentially improved Type XXIs. Even failed concepts proved influential. Guided missiles evolved from the Fritz X. Cruise missiles descended from the V-1. The rocket fighter experiments informed high-altitude interceptor design. Yet the legacy is morally complex. These weapons were created by a regime that embodied evil, built partly by slave labor, intended for genocide. The scientific brilliance cannot be separated from the moral horror. Werner von Braun reached for the stars, but stood on a foundation of corpses. The secret weapons of Nazi Germany almost won World War II, not because they came close to victory, but because had they arrived earlier, been produced in greater numbers, and been employed more effectively, they might have prolonged the war substantially or made Allied victory far costlier. That they failed to do so owes as much to German strategic errors and resource limitations as to Allied countermeasures. These weapons represented genuine revolutions in military technology. They demonstrated what was possible and set the template for decades of development. The jet age, the missile age, the precision-guided weapon age, all began in laboratories and proving grounds of the Third Reich. The ultimate lesson may be this: technological superiority alone cannot win wars. Victory requires not just advanced weapons but sound strategy, adequate resources, competent leadership, and, perhaps most importantly, a cause worth fighting for. Nazi Germany possessed brilliant scientists and engineers, but fought for a grotesque ideology that ensured its eventual defeat. The secret weapons came too late, cost too much, and served an evil cause. They changed the nature of warfare forever, but they could not change the war's outcome. In the end, the Third Reich's vaunted Wunderwaffen proved to be exactly what their critics claimed: expensive distractions that accelerated rather than delayed Germany's inevitable defeat.